and it has to do with testing in Wyoming schools. And for those folks that are listening in other states, pay attention now, because this is an important court case. Can you tell everybody what happened?
Well, what happened is early this spring, quite a few parents began requesting in their district and also of the Wyoming Department of Education the ability to opt out of statewide testing. So what happened is sometime in early spring, then Director Rich Crandall, you remember Rich when he was the director of the Wyoming Department of Education, decided that he would ask the Attorney General for an opinion on whether federal or state law prevents school districts from consenting to these parents' requests and allowing their children to opt out of state assessments. We now have that. That communique came in on August 27th to Acting Superintendent City Hill and was made public last week. So, and in that opinion, the Attorney General has said that parents cannot opt their children out of statewide assessment. In other words, they are being required to have their children tested whether they want to or not. At least that's the bulk of what this opinion says.
Okay, now, let's take a look at why they would say that. Well, we'll set it up real quick so everybody understands. Your kid is going to school. Here comes a federal standardized test?
Right now, Wyoming is still administering the pause. We have field tested the SBAC, which is one of two national consortiums that are federally funded. But for now, we are still administering the pause. The Wyoming Department of Education is hard selling, however, the federal SBAC. They want it. They want it bad.
Okay, so now let's start from the parents' point of view. Why would a parent want to opt out of testing their kids?
You know, parents have been citing a variety of reasons. The intrusiveness of the test, concerns over data sharing with the federal government, just the overall amount of testing, and also the stress. They're saying that, you know, their kids are under a tremendous amount of stress. And then some are simply requesting because they want to protest with their feet. So it's a variety of reasons, Glenn, why parents are citing they want to opt out.
Okay, now from the state's level, why would the state want them to take the test?
Well, in this opinion, and this is really the juxtaposition, most of the rationale within the opinion basically centered around the federal and state accountability measures. Federally, No Child Left Behind requires states to administer a statewide assessment. In No Child Left Behind, there's a 95% completion requirement, in other words, or excuse me, participation requirement. In other words, 95% of your students have to participate in the test. So that's a federal requirement. However, Peter Michael, the Attorney General of Wyoming, really more heavily cited the 2011 Wyoming Accountability Act, basically saying that this Accountability Act is much more strict than a version back in 2004, and really requires that schools, they're going to get a performance rating based on the outcome of these tests, and then consequences will flow from them. And so he much more heavily cited Wyoming's Accountability Act and said, therefore, because schools are going to be classified based on the result of the test, and because that classification is going to mean some sort of penalty, every kid has to take the test.
Oh, now I was waiting for the penalty part. So if not enough kids participate in the testing, then there's going to be a financial penalty for the state of Wyoming.
Well, no. Under the Wyoming Accountability Act, the penalties involve how the school performs, how these kids perform on the test.
Okay,
so it's all about, it's about how the school is doing. There's 4 levels of categories. I've talked about this. It's been a while since I talked about this, but it's and right now the state is in whatever 2.0 version of the Accountability Act. They've been passing a lot of bills, Glenn, for the last couple of years. So, but ultimately, there's no doubt that there's pretty strenuous penalties being placed into law, and so the Attorney General is saying kids have to be tested so that we can have an accurate. I mean, he talks about having that we need to basically ensure the validity of the data, which is very interesting. I think his exact words, let me find them. As the department indicated in its request, an alternative policy that would permit parents to opt their children out could compromise the integrity of the information which determines school classification and adequate yearly progress.
Okay. Now, does this have any effect at all on kids in charter schools, private schools, home schools?
Charter schools, yes. Charter schools are public schools, so yep, that means kids in charter schools have to take the test as well. Private schools, no. homeschooling, no.
Okay, talking with Amy Edmonds from Wyoming Liberty Group. So now, let me ask you your opinion on this. Where do you come down on parents' right to choose, if you will, whether their kids are going to take the test or not?
Well, a couple of things. Number one, first of all, Glenn, this is just an appalling attack on parents and really on liberty. I mean, this is wrong in a number, but I am not surprised that this is happening because my number 2 point is this is another massive indictment against the system and what is happening in the public education system. So, this is just another example of what is going so profoundly wrong, that we are now forcing parents to have their children in school, even when parents don't want to. Parents have whatever reason, and quite frankly, I live in the world where I don't believe parents need to even justify why they want to opt their child out. If they don't want their child to take the test, that's their business. That's their business. But regardless, now we're saying they're being forced to actually take the test, which is, outrageous. And I've talked to parents, and this is going to cause a humongous problem for the Wyoming Department of Education, the governor's office. Parents are just beginning to hear about this because, as I said, we have not known about it until just last week. It was the letter itself is dated August 27th. Public, we're not made aware until last week. As more and more parents become aware of this, there's going to be, I think, some pretty angry folks. A lot of parents are already talking about, listen, I'm just going to tell my kid, I don't care how you score on this test. Answer C for every question.
Yeah, sure. Just get something in there. So, all right, to be clear about it, you're taking more of a libertarian approach where parents are the ultimate authority when it comes to their kids, and the government has no right to say that you have to be in this classroom taking this test despite what your parents have to say.
Well, absolutely. I mean, who exactly are the schools accountable to? I mean, this just raises that huge question. Right. Who are the schools accountable to? Are they accountable to parents and to kids, or are they accountable to a system? That's so we've basically gone to the point where now we're saying that schools are accountable to this Accountability Act. Therefore, they have to ignore the desires of the very people they're servicing, parents and families, and make these kids take these tests. And my third point is we are way off. We're way off point here when we are getting into such high stakes testing. I mean, I use that term a lot, and obviously the Department of Education, and they don't like to use the term high-stakes testing, but how much more high-stakes can it be when you have the Wyoming Attorney General saying kids have to be there?
All right, now, if this was, so this is something that's already been decided in court, right?
No. This is just, so that brings up a whole other set of questions.
Okay, good. Yeah, help clear this one up for me. Where are we at with this?
So this is a letter from the Attorney General. From that will stem, I think, a lot of things. I mean, potentially districts, they have now put the districts in huge pickles because obviously litigation could happen. Parents could sue. Legislators very well could step in and clarify whether they truly meant that the parents had no right to opt their children out and that the Accountability Act required that every kid must be tested. I think, and also, there's nothing in law that says what the penalty, there's no repercussions. Exactly how is the district going to penalize a parent if they just simply say their child is sick? The law doesn't say that.
That's an interesting point. Liz, I hadn't thought about that. If a parent just decides to say to their kid, you have a sick day, you have the flu, go back to bed, turn on some cartoons. There is no repercussions for the parent unless they want to call a truant officer out. I can't see what else they could do.
Right. There's no penalty. There's no penalty. So because it's not, the Wyoming Accountability Act was not written with this in mind, so there is no penalty inside of it. So yeah, this is still a tremendous gray area, and I think there's going to have to be some serious clarification. Obviously, the right thing to do here is for legislators to reassert that Wyoming parents have the right to direct the care and education of their kids, period. I mean, that's the clear thing, including opting out. But there's another pickle. I mentioned No Child Left Behind. We do live under this federal law that requires 95% participation in the No Child Left Behind in the statewide assessment. That has never been a huge problem, and if you just do the math, Glenn, if you look at the numbers like in your district and what 5% means, it would be a lot of families. It's a pretty big number if you think about how many kids would have to actually not participate on the day the test happens. So it's never been a real issue in Wyoming, but we are still under No Child Left Behind. So we still have that 95% participation requirement.
Mhm. Okay, now let me ask you something about the kids taking the test, because I remember back when I was in school and I had to take a test like this. It wasn't to find out so much where the school was at the time, although that was some interesting information. It was to find out where I was at as a student, and the school adjusted my curriculum based on how well I did on the test.
Yeah, no, the pause is not that test.
Right.
That's the pause is extremely unuseful for teachers and actually improving instruction for students. That's not what this test is built for. So that's not what it does. And that's one of the big arguments that a lot of folks have been making about what's wrong with so much of the testing that's going on in schools. Is it's this obsession with a system, with figuring out how well the system is, and instead of focusing on the student and helping administering tests that would actually help grow a student.
All right. So the next thing in my mind, where I would naturally go with this, is we have a legislative session coming up within a few months. So I'd get a hold of my legislators in the state of Wyoming and say, okay, here's what we need to do. And there's the next question. What do we need to do? What do we tell them? How do we guide them on this?
Well, I think it's very clear that legislators need to be informed that this is happening, and I think there needs to be some form of clarification in the Wyoming Accountability Act that reasserts that parents have the right again. It is somewhat of a sad day, and I say this hesitantly because it's frustrating that we would have to even clarify in law, Glenn, that parents have the right to direct the education of their children. But again, as my number 2 point pointed out, this is where we're at. This is how bad we've gotten. This is the craziness, the mania between the Common Core and all this testing, and this is where we're at, that I think legislators need to reassert that parents have this right, and that it's up to the state to prove its point, not the other way around. And we can be comforted in the fact that this is not the only state that this is happening. I mean, recently, just a week or two ago in Iowa, the director of their Department of Education came out and said it's kind of strange how close it was to basically what our Attorney General said, which is Iowa, like all the other states, are involved in all this federal mania of Common Core and accountability. Iowa requires all of this accountability, therefore all the kids have to take the test.
Right.
So this is happening all over the country.
Okay. Amy Edmonds is on the phone, Wyoming Liberty Group, as we talk about testing in schools and your kids and the reason for testing. And the thing that gets me more than anything else, Amy, is that the reason, as we were just talking about a moment ago, the reason for testing is no longer to find out where the kids are at. But I can understand you want to know where the school is at, but to find out where the school is at so you can get some more funding for the school. Am I wrapping this up correctly?
Well, you're getting there. I mean, I think the next part of this that's being literally sort of ignored, or at least I think they're hoping it'll go away, is what this is going to mean for teachers. Teachers in Wyoming have sat silent through this whole Common Core debate, through most of the accountability debate. They haven't been willing to stick their necks out. They aren't willing to. I've talked to so many teachers, Glenn, who are so deeply unhappy, and not one of them is willing to come forward. But what the Wyoming Accountability Act and all this testing means ultimately is that they're working on phase 2, which is to tie these test scores, the way that they rank these schools, directly to teachers, and it will affect that teacher's employment. So that's the next phase, and that's where we're headed. And I think I have hope that eventually we will finally see some people willing to step up and talk about what is happening. But that's the next phase, and it's going to get very political and very ugly.
Well, and what concerns me more than anything, I see it in the town that I live in, and now the state as well. There seems to be the push, not just with schools, but to look around the country and say, hey, look how New York is doing it. Look at how San Francisco is doing it. Well, that's the way the big cities are doing it, so we have to do it that way because that's how they're doing it. And if little old Wyoming wants to, be as big as all the big states, we have to do it their way instead of doing it our own way.
Right, that's exactly it. Yeah, Wyoming, it seems as though, particularly at the Wyoming Department of Education, they never met somebody else's idea that they didn't love.
You should write that one down.
Right, we love to adopt everybody else's idea. We love to rush forward with every new federal idea, initiative, whatever, and adopt it and try to call it our own and try to make it fit into Gillette, Wyoming. We do everything we can. We spend tons of money to try to make it fit in Gillette, Wyoming.
All right. So where do we go now? We talked about the legislative session coming up.
Yeah, I mean, definitely folks need to, first of all, check out the article, whylibertyineducation.org, and then you need to give your legislators a call and let them know, are you aware that this exists? We're going to, I haven't posted the actual Attorney General letter. We need to do that, and we'll do that.
Mm-hmm.
We'll get it posted so people can click on it and actually read it. But, legislators need to be aware that this is happening. Also, the governor, call the governor's office and let them know, I'm not happy about this, and I should have the right to opt my child out if I don't want my child to take that test on that certain day. So that's, I think, the first step, making sure that legislators are aware. And then, of course, obviously asking for some remedy. Parents have the right to do this, and if the legislature unfortunately has to, they need to clarify in law that parents have the right to opt out.
Well, and provide them maybe with some good arguments. For example, if my kid doesn't take this test, it's not like it affects his grades.
Right.
He's not going to go from an A student to a B student because he didn't take the test.
Well, that's a huge. You make a really, really good point, and it's a point well taken, and a point that should be heard by legislators. Is that you're creating an entire system where there is little to no buy-in by the public, and ultimately, if parents, who you stated exactly right, there's really no incentive for them to buy into this whole thing. So, like I said, I'm hearing parents say, I'm just going to tell my kids to circle C on every one of the tests. They need to concentrate on the ACT because that's what matters in my family. I want them to go to college. That's the problem. You are creating a system where there is little to no buy-in. You have a very small group of education elites who go to all these legislative committees, and they have no idea what's going on with the public. They think that the public, there's just a tiny majority of people like myself and a few others that don't like this. They are so profoundly wrong. And there's really nothing that parents in this whole system that parents have bought into, and they don't need to. They can just.
Well, and you brought up a point earlier in our little discussion here, which is, okay, a parent is in charge of their child, and they get to decide ultimately what happens to their child. It's not that a group of legislators or bureaucrats get together and decide this is what's going to happen to your child, and you have no say in the matter.
Right. Yep.
Yeah, okay.
That's right.
Well, yeah, that kind of wraps it up. Goodbye, Amy. No, that pretty much wraps it up for me. I mean, you are ultimately in charge of your kids. About the only opt-out I can see is for those parents that never show up to school board meetings in the first place. They just shuffle their kids off to school and hope for the best.
Right. Yeah, and that does happen, but I don't think, we hear from and we know. And it's interesting because I've talked to folks who've campaigned statewide and who've been out and really, really out meeting the people, and they were shocked at how much education is an issue and how much people talk about this. And that's what I'm saying. I think there's a small group of folks, and sadly there's a lot of legislators in that little cadre who have no idea how unpopular this is and how they're creating a system that no one is buying into.
Okay. Where do people find your article again? I know it's on the Why Liberty website.
whylibertyineducation.org.
Okay. Now, where do you go from here in covering the story? Is there anyone you're off to talk to about this? Because then there's got to be a follow-up story.
There will be follow-up. So, we're looking at, I've talked to parents. I'd like to have a parent perspective. So, yeah, we'll be following and watching it and certainly talking to legislators and see what they're going to do in January.
All right, Amy, as always, thanks for coming on.
Thank you so much.